So hi, I'm presenting a project which is also a collaboration with the Senegalese tax administration, so it's also about taxation, but this project focuses on property taxes. So Pierre gave us a great reminder of why it's relevant to be trying to work on fiscal capacity in developing countries. And so why do we think that it's interesting to focus on property taxes in the Senegalese context? So property taxes among fiscal instruments have a certain number of positive features. For example, the tax base is both visible and immobile, which in theory should make it easier to tax than other types of wealth or income. And there's also great scope for improvement because property tax revenues contribute a very small share in the budgets of municipalities and local governments in African countries and other developing countries. And in addition to that, in Senegal, over the past decades, there's been strong decentralization policies, meaning that municipalities face increasing responsibilities, and so to fund these local public services for which they're increasingly responsible, they need these local fiscal revenues. And in this context, the property tax system in Senegal faces currently some big challenges, of which we've identified three main ones, which we hope this project will help addressing. The first challenge is that there are too few properties in the tax net. The coverage is too small. And so based on the exploitation of cadastre data that we've been modernizing with the DGID, we estimate that in the city of Dakar, there's only around a third of plots of properties which are registered on the administration's tax registry. So there's a clear scope for improvement here. A second big challenge is what we call the lack of institutional memory. So one could first think, okay, maybe the administration is taxing few property owners, but they're just targeting them well. Maybe they're just going where owners are the wealthiest, where they know that they're going to be able to raise revenue, and maybe it's not necessarily worth it to invest so much to expand the tax net. But we don't think this is the case because we observe that among taxpayers which are known by the administration at some point in time, it's frequent that they won't continue paying in subsequent years. So based on a pilot survey, we identified that among taxpayers that had either paid once or received a tax notification, at some point there's only 19% of them which paid in the current year. So this to us seemed as also an important inefficiency. And a third main challenge that we're also going to try to work with in this project is the fuzziness of the valuation procedure for the assessment of this tax. So officially, the property tax liability is 5% of the market value of the property. But in countries like Senegal, as in a lot of developing countries, real estate markets are very small, and there's little information and data available to benchmark these values, which makes it extremely difficult to have a rigorous approach to the valuation. So with the project so I'm going to give more detail about the content of the project, but what are the overall research questions that we're trying to get at with this new property tax management system? Our first research question is kind of the overall impact evaluation question. Does the new property tax management system that we're working on, which includes to a large extent technological upgrades, allow improving tax assessment and tax collection, and through which channels? The second question is somehow linked to also some of the questions that Pierre was mentioning in their project, because we're also interested in comparing a rule-based system to the tax assessment with a system in which tax officials have more discretion, which is the current way of property tax assessment. And I'll give a bit more detail on how this is going to be done. And then our third research question relates a bit more to what we could call the second-order effects of the program. So if we do observe that the new system helps improve tax collection and tax revenue, which we hope it will, do we observe any effects on local governance dynamics within the region of Dakar? And so by this, I mean on citizen demand for public goods, for accountability, and we're also going to be looking at the role of local governance intermediaries, which are the neighborhood chiefs in Dakar, which play an important role in these local governance dynamics. So what's the content of the program? It has 4 dimensions. So the first dimension is that the program is going to correspond to an intensive property tax fiscal census in the region of Dakar. So in targeted areas, in the treated areas, there's going to be a comprehensive survey of property owners. The second dimension is that this is going to be done using a new application, a new software, which will allow the automatic upload of information and prevent loss of information, which we think is quite prevalent in the current way it works. The third dimension is that all this is going to be done based on a modernized cadastre dataset with geolocalization of plots and properties. And so for this, we've been working over the past months with the DGID to modernize cadastral maps. So the maps were already existing, where they're not like drawing the cadastre now. It's just that everything is converted to a uniform format and integrating GIS information, which will make it easier to use in a harmonized way for the whole city. And the fourth dimension relates to the valuation aspect and the rule versus discretion research question I was mentioning. The new application will allow what we call a rule-based valuation method, in which field agents, when they're surveying properties, only have to enter some observable characteristics of the property, and based on these, on property location within the city and on property area, the application can compute an estimated tax liability for the property. So we were invited to mention linkages in the presentation. So on this dimension, we've been working with the African Property Tax Initiative. So it's an initiative launched by the ICTD, which is also a DFID-funded initiative. So this is just to give a more graphical overview of our design. The randomization unit is the cadastral section. So the whole city of Dakar is divided in cadastral sections. So to give you an idea, in the median number of properties, of plots in a cadastral section is around 300. So it's a bit bigger than what we would call a block. And our universe, our sample, the sample we're going to work with is 200 of these cadastral sections spread out in the city of Dakar. And they're going to be divided in a treatment and a control group. So in the treatment group, as you can see on the left, that's where there's going to be the comprehensive fiscal surveys. And the treatment group is going to be further divided in two groups of sections, and it's only in half of the treatment group that we're going to be tested the rule-based valuation method. In the other treated sections, it's going to be the current valuation method. So this will allow to compare the change only in the valuation method. And in the control sections, there's going to be none of these fiscal census, and the tax officials are not going to be using the new application. So maybe let me briefly mention what our data sources. I won't go into all the details of the outcomes. We're using administrative data from the DGID, so this is all that relates to tax assessment and tax collections. We're going to be conducting baseline and endline survey of both taxpayers and neighborhood chiefs. And a third type of data source are going to be high-resolution satellite images. And maybe let me just mention another type of data collection method we're going to be doing. That's the third bullet point here, to be able to compare the accuracy of the tax assessment under the rule-based method versus the discretionary method. We're going to be conducting some back checks with experts from the real estate market for a subsample of properties. This is just to illustrate the types of outcomes and indicators we're looking at for the local governance aspect. So that was the third research question. So the way it works is that neighborhood chiefs in Dakar act as intermediaries between the inhabitants and the municipal councils. And so the type of outcomes we're going to be interested in are at two levels. First, the interactions between the property owners, the inhabitants, and the neighborhood chiefs, and the interactions between the neighborhood chiefs and the municipal councils. And so the red boxes are the populations that are going to be surveyed. The current status. So we're going to be starting the baseline survey very soon, next week actually in Dakar, and the program implementation on the tax administration side is planned to start in October. A few challenges that we've encountered. So the cleaning and processing of the cadastre data is a lengthy exercise, and that was expected, but maybe we underestimated it a little bit. The good thing is that we're pretty sure that this modernized cadastre data will be useful way beyond the project, and that's what we hope. But it's true that maybe we've underestimated a bit the length of this work. A second dimension is the development of the technology. We're really paying attention to have this designed collaboratively with the administration and with the different parties involved. We didn't want to just give the assignment to a development company that would then come back with something that would not fit. So we're going step by step, but sometimes it takes a bit more time than expected. And then a third challenge, which is of course part of the program, is that one thing we've been talking a lot about with the DGID is how to make sure that we're going to be able to access property owners during these censuses to retrieve their identity information. So we're brainstorming about sensitization campaigns and things like that. There's several points for feedback I've noted here, and I'm happy to discuss further, but should I go through them or? Very briefly. Bit, yeah. So we're happy to have discussions, more discussions about this rules versus discretion comparison in this specific case of property taxation. And we're happy to hear views on how to make this the most credible and relevant possible. This is similar to what Pierre was mentioning. In our pilot surveys, we've been having challenges asking questions about corruption. Basically, when we have questions on just yes or no, is there corruption? It's really hard to go beyond that to get maybe measures of on the intensive margin, because a lot of people just answer that they're not interacting with the administrations at all, and so it's really hard for them to just give other types of estimates. So questions that we found in other studies were hard to replicate in the Senegalese context, so any ideas are welcome. We're also happy to have discussions on the measures and outcomes that we're going to be interested in for the local governance aspect. And the neighborhood chief surveys. And then maybe, last but not least, once we get these high-resolution satellite images, we just obtained the agreement to have them. We're using them primarily to measure property area, but we think there's a lot of other interesting information that could be retrieved from them. There's a lot of work out there on these kind of analysis, and so we're happy to hear ideas on how this could be exploited in the most interesting way. I think I'll stop there.
Will the control group get phased in, and if so, at what time?
So for the first evaluation, no. It's but then, I mean, I guess this is also up to the DGID at some point. Once we have first wave of results, so after the fiscal year, if they find that it's positive, I guess the idea, yes, it's to expand it. So the system will be also usable outside of Dakar. It's supposed to be national. So if it's found to be positive, it can then be expanded in all cities.
But you have at least a year before.
Yes, that's clear that we need this time window to evaluate, and yeah.
So about the corruption, asking the chiefs may not be very useful, I guess, because they may be, since their position has to do with being a go-between with the government. And then another piece of advice about corruption in surveys that we did in courts, that I did in courts some time ago, don't use the word corruption or, just something like, did you make a payment to a government bureaucrat in a very sort of framed in a very neutral way, and that worked. People weren't declaring that they were making the payment, but then the same population declared.
So we're not asking the chiefs, I was asking the taxpayers. And we do have questions like this just to get the yes or no answer, is there corruption? We're also integrating a list experiment in the baseline survey, but this just gives you the overall proportion of cases of corruption. But then if we're interested in something a bit more detailed on the extent of it, the amounts, that's where we're facing trouble. So hopefully after the baseline, then we'll get better ideas for the inline survey. But yeah, thank you for the suggestions.
So one thing I was not so clear on is, in the peer study, it's clear that they are after the possibility that some properties, for example, are assessed at below value. That's the component that you share. What is it that you're mostly worried about? Properties being skipped altogether, or being misreported in terms of how many square meters they have? Which of these two margins, or both?
So,
that you're after?
yeah. So I think
Okay,
both.
the authority is our most concerned.
Yeah, so I think the authorities, I mean, we can probably also hear from Morfal from the DJD, but their fear is, first, there's not enough properties on the register. We know that we're missing a lot of them because it's very time intensive to go and survey them, so we're just working with the little we have and we're able to reach out to. We don't have enough staff to go out, and it's lengthy to record information. But they're also very worried that just everything is undervalued because some guidelines which exist for valuation are based on decrees that are like 30, 40 years old. So even if you would respect the very details of how you're supposed to do a cadastral valuation, you would end up with values which are too low. Then in the field, they're not carrying out these valuations because they're just too complicated, too lengthy. So the rule base is supposed to try to simplify that and also update the valuation rule. Then when you survey taxpayers...
Sorry, but the
yeah.
frustration part applies to valuing property that's already considered.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's not the extensive... Yes, exactly. It's just for the value. Yeah. And then some taxpayers also have experiences, which are, I mean, that's just, it's declared, of tax assessors coming and just assessing humongous values randomly, and they feel harassed. So I guess there could be two directions.
Now, so one issue with the rule-based system is, I imagine the inspectors will be able to kind of deduce how the objective dimensions they declare impact the valuation.
Yeah.
So they may be able to game the system.
Yeah.
As if they were under a discretionary regime. And so are you envisioning using these real estate experts to go and value some of the same objective dimensions to be able to pick that up?
Yes, that's also something we're a bit concerned about. Like we don't know to what extent it would happen, but yes, for sure this can happen, that they could try to game the variables. If you have any other ideas of way we could check or document this, we're happy to hear feedback.